So let's talk about putting an army of grim black armoured crusaders on the tabletop and take up the cause of the long war for chaos with the Black Legion. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Chaos Space Marines and more specifically Black Legion, with a video for some ideas on starting the army in current Warhammer 40K. In the video, let's talk about why you might want to collect Black Legion in the first place, some ideas for planning an army, a look through the veterans of the Long War Detachment, Abaddon the Despoiler, Harken World Claimer, Chaos discount deals and options for expanding, and finish up with one example army list. Loads to talk about, so let's jump straight in. First up, why might you want to collect Black Legion in the first place? The Black Legion were formerly known as the Lunar Wolves, and then the Sons of Horus during the Great Crusade and Heresy changed their name to the Black Legion following their War Master's passing, and these guys were pretty much the traitors-in-chief, the Legion of the War Master during the Heresy, and now in Warhammer 40k are grim Black Crusaders fighting under Abaddon the Despoiler, and perhaps the single most unified and deadly fighting force out of the traitor legions, with a focus on martial proficiency and the practicalities of their long campaign against the Imperium. All the training and advantages of the Space Marines, often enhanced by various dark gifts to the ruinous powers, they're an undivided legion that can seek blessings from all of the deities, and some notable Chaos Lords ascending to the lofty rank of Demon Prince. They've long harboured themselves within the Eye of Terror, Abaddon leading great incursions into real space, with his 13 Black Crusades that culminated in the destruction of the Cadian Gate, and then unleashing the Great Rift across the galaxy, making the Warhammer 40k setting what it is at the moment. In battle, they're perhaps best known for the absolute staples of what the Chaos Space Marines have to offer. Their Legionaries and their Dread Chaos Terminators and Chosen are second to none, and they're perhaps the most archetypical Chaos Space Marines. Miniatures wise, if you're collecting the Black Legion in 40k, they use the large Chaos Space Marine miniature range, one of 40k's oldest and most established factions, and they have had several waves of nice model releases over the past 2 editions. The majority of their miniatures updated to modern standards, though there are still a few older relics in their ranks, maybe the Bikers most notably, though a few of the older Demon engines and tanks maybe do stick out a bit as well. I feel like the Chaos Space Marine miniature lineup is a particularly good one for representing Black Legion. You see them painted up on all the box art in their iconic black plates with sort of brass trim, which can be a bit of a pain if you want to paint them, but that's the same for the rest of Chaos Marines really. There's maybe not huge amounts of support for the individual Chaos Legions in Warhammer 40k outside of the deity ones. The Black Legion are maybe better than most though. Having the standard rank and file may be best suited to represent them rather than some of the oddities of the other legions isn't the worst. And they do have 2 named characters of their own as well in Abaddon the Despoiler and Harken World Claimer, and that's 2 more than the other major undivided legions. You can also potentially dip into the Sons of Horus range from the Heresy 30k range if you want to, for a little bit more flair specific to the Legion. That might depend on the look that you're going for them. For their miniature range, as mentioned, most Chaos kits have been updated at least fairly recently. Their rank and file Legionaries are pretty nice, looking the business in their black power armour there. And there's also a Kill Team kit option that you can have that has some expanded options. They can draw on the ranks of Demon engines such as this Venom Crawler, able to tear apart enemy infantry with ease. There's things like the Possessed Demon King and Warp Talon Jump infantry, the Demon Princes that Chaos Lords might ascend to when they're particularly favoured by the Dark Gods. More standard Space Marine bits of kit like the Vindicator tank, that one a big siege breaker able to punch holes in the biggest enemy tanks and war machines, and they can throw in a whole bunch of cannon fodder with their mortal followers such as these Chaos Cultists. For their unique Black Legion miniatures, we've got Abaddon the Despoiler and Harken World Claimer. Abaddon is one of the principal big bads of Warhammer 40k, taking up the War Master's mantle and Dracnian, and was very well received as a miniature, being one of people's favourites in the Chaos Space Marine range, and Harken World Claimer is sort of his hound and herald, planting a spear in the world that Abaddon will conquer, and declaring that the world will fall within 100 days. Again, quite a fun miniature, I think. As mentioned, the Sons of Horus really have quite a lot of miniature representation in the Heresy era range, if you want some stuff that is more sort of legacy plate, and has a lot of iconography sporting the Eye of Horus itself. There's a whole bunch of different minor characters that could fit the bill for certain support characters and HQ choices. And they also do have sculpts for Horus himself though he is long dead in the 40k setting. Price-wise, as Warhammer 40k goes, Chaos Space Marines aren't too bad compared with some armies. Perhaps in particular with certain kits like Legionaries and Chaos Terminators, they tend to have a slightly better points per dollar ratio than some armies out there, so it might be a touch cheaper than some factions to get a massive amount of points on the table. I wouldn't say that they're one of the very cheapest in the game, and some units can still run kind of expensive, often the more recent kits that have, say, small numbers of elite infantry in them. and they don't have quite as many discount deals versus the Loyalist Space Marines, who generally tend to have quite a lot of options. Rules-wise, the Black Legion, like the rest of the standard Chaos Space Marines, use Codex Chaos Space Marines for their rules, and they share the Dark Paths rule, where they have lethal or sustained hits whenever one unit shoots or fights, but you do have to take a leadership test, and if you fail then you might take some mortal wounds. Given the fickleness of the Chaos Gods, it can definitely mean that a lot of their units can punch up pretty well against tough stuff though with lethal hits, and always have a bit more damage on tap if they really need it. Chaos Space Marines tend to have both range and melee forces, and I feel like it's appropriate enough for Black Legion to have a mix of both. They're very tactically adept and ready to use all the tools in the Dark God's arsenal to take on their foe. In general, Chaos Space Marines tend to be a bit more melee focused versus the Loyalists, but can do both of them at least well enough in 10th edition. The Black Legion themselves have their sort of themed detachment in the Veterans of the Long War, which has a bunch of styling and wording that makes it clear that it's intended to be their sort of spiritual home. We'll talk through that one shortly. I'd say it's certainly not awful, but maybe sort of around mid-ranking in the sort of power level of those detachments. Though in 10th edition you can absolutely play any of the other detachments if it makes more sense. There's another 7 of them in the Codex, plus the download one, the Creations of Bile, and most of them feel like they could support an army of Black Legion well enough. Overall, in terms of in-game power, most armies in Warhammer 40k are usable enough, the right list being adequately strong casually, and also with the option to top tournaments. Chaos Space Marines in particular seem to have a slightly lower win rate compared with some currently. Not by a huge amount though, and they do seem to be one of the armies that's actually fairly well represented on the top tables of tournaments so far. The rest of the detachments, maybe the Creations of Bile and Renegade Raiders, are having better performance versus Veterans of the Long War for most people. Either way, 40k game balance changes a lot, and any one day-to-day balance pass isn't exactly going to be make or break. Overall, if you want to collect an army of grim Black Crusaders, striking out from first the Eye of Terror and then the Cicatrix Maledictum, and taking the war to the followers of the Corpse Emperor, the Black Legion could be for you. If choosing to collect Chaos on Black Legion in particular, there's plenty of places that you could go for other info. As mentioned, the Chaos Space Marine Codex has unit profiles, rules, lore and miniature galleries from Games Workshop. That'll probably be on the purchase list for most people who are new to starting an army. For Space Marines and Chaos Space Marine Legions though, there's a huge amount of lore in novels, and particularly in the vast Horus Heresy series. The events of the Heresy and the early backstory of some of their central characters is explored there, though there's plenty in the more contemporary setting as well. Otherwise, you could mess around with some army lists on things like New Recruit, Warpedia, or Games Workshop's app. You could try Tabletop Simulator, or proxying some models to try them out before you pick them up. And here on YouTube there's a vast amount of information as well. I made a few Chaos Space Marine videos, including a Codex overview, a unit tier list, and a look at some top units in a video, which I'll link in the video description. And hopefully I'll be making a video going through each and every Chaos unit in the very near future. Otherwise though, there's massive battle reports, painting guides, and lore on other channels, and it'd be worth following along with Chaos Space Marine social media as well, either Discord, Facebook, or subreddits, or wherever you get yours. Just being part of a community of other people collecting the same army can allow you to imbibe a lot of knowledge just by osmosis. When planning a 40k army, I'd start out by making a rough 1000 point or 2000 point army list, perhaps just to give you a rough idea as to where your collection might go, and maybe give you a bit of overall scope as to where you might want to wind up with once you've actually gradually built up and assembled your army. In Warhammer, a lot of people just tend to sort of build balance, maybe getting a discount deal as the core of the force, and then adding units that either appeal to them or you find particularly exciting for what they're going to do on the tabletop, or any miniatures that you just particularly like the look and feel of. That approach seems pretty appropriate for Black Legion as well, who might field a mix of things. I think if you wanted to go fluffy for their units though, there are their 2 unique characters. I'd probably aim to get at least a fair few of the Chaos Battle Line and Elites, Legionaries, Terminators and Chosen, as they feel like some of the units that most exemplify the army and their martial discipline. Otherwise though, you could collect primarily for gameplay, maybe going for one of the detachments and really trying to build around the units that are going to be most effective in that one, perhaps the Veterans of the Long War, perhaps one of the others. Or you could make up some lore and character choices for your own particular warband. Say for example, is your Black Legion individual force going to be led by a Chaos Lord sworn to Khorne or something like that? They do have a few known sub-factions in the lore that maybe fight in the name of one of the Chaos deities in particular. Or are you going to go for a more Chaos Undivided approach? You could also throw some allies in there. Knights and demons can currently be allied to Black Legion, though it's not impossible that some of their rules might change given that both of those factions are likely to be updated this year. In general, it's probably best to have the mainstay of your force focused on the actual army itself, as allies' rules can change quite a bit. Another part of prepping an army is deciding about paint things. Before jumping into the entire faction, it's likely worth painting up a test model. Likely a regular Chaos Space Marine Legionary would be the best place to start for the Black Legion. Pretty well representative of the faction with a bunch of the things that you'd have to do on other miniatures there, and also not really quite as big an investment or as critical as a big character or vehicle. In general, unfortunately, Chaos Space Marines are one of the more time-consuming armies to paint up. The main issue that they have is that they have a lot of block colour, say the black on their armour plates, but then they have a massive amount of trim and extra detail. So all the bits that are sort of painted in brassy gold sort of here. Never mind all the other bits like the steel bits on their weapons, the bits of cloth and chainmail. And between all that, you get a model that doesn't actually have all that much of the primary army colour on it, and it needs to paint a lot of things in detail. It does mean that if you want an army that completely matches the Games Workshop box art, it's probably going to take a bit longer than most armies. There are various ways that people might be able to save a bit of time with that, potentially using black contrast paint, or maybe for certain models where the trim is particularly all over the place, like perhaps the Helldrake, even spraying in the trim colour and then filling in the black plates. At least some people might do a scheme where the trim is painted the same colour as the rest of the army, just purely for sanity reasons as well though. In any case, there's loads of good painting guides for painting Black Legion out there. They're pretty much some of the best known Chaos Space Marines, so you can just pick one and follow along. Games Workshop have some, but there's also lots out there for other creators. For some Black Legion rules in game, let's talk through a few of their unique characters and perhaps most iconic units, and then take a look at their themed detachment. As mentioned, Abaddon Despoiler is as close to a Commander-in-Chief as Chaos has in the 41st millennium. The big man himself being 280 points, and a pretty mighty stat line, 9 wounds with a 2+ save and a 4+ invulnerable save in his Terminator plate. Absolutely monstrous melee damage with Dracnian with 8 attacks at strength 14, AP 4, damage 3 and devastating wounds, and he can do sweep attacks with the Talon as well. He's got the chance to generate command points with Dark Pacts, and then the choice of 3 different buffs that he can give units nearby, maybe the best one being the reroll hit rolls from Paragon of Hatred, which goes in a big 6-inch aura, though he also has the option to give nearby units a 4+ invulnerable save, if that might make a bit more sense. In general, I'd say the best value for him is between the big reroll aura and that mighty melee profile, the command points being a nice extra I suppose. With a 6-inch reroll aura around that model, you can potentially get a lot of Chaos Space Marine firepower in there as he advances up the board with some elites, and that can be particularly nice with Dark Pacts, meaning that you're probably going to get a fair few more of those 6s for the sustained or lethals as well, and maybe making him very nice in Pact-bound Zealots as well if you want to. You can do some pretty crazy combos with him and a Hellbrute. In general, I'd say is solidly usable for Chaos Space Marines right now. That doesn't make it into too many competitive lists, just as he's such a massive points investment, to the point where his unit's going to be just enormously high value for the enemy to kill it, and you're going to need to make him work on all fronts between damage buffs, command point generation, and damage output. Definitely solid enough though, and can be a menace to handle. Harken Worldclaimer is the jump pack Chaos Lord with his Hellspear and Talon. He's 90 points and can only lead Raptors. His melee's alright and has a bit of precision. He can chuck his spear for a bit of extra damage as well. And otherwise his big things are giving Raptors mortal wound impact hits, where if you can make them into melee, they'll have the chance to gain mortal wounds. If you could get an entire squad of 10 in there, then that's around about 5. But practically it can be kind of hard to, just due to the size of bases. If units are damaged but not destroyed and nearby him though, they still have to test Battle Shock in the command phase, and that can make him kind of handy enough to have when scrapping over the midboard if you're not able to wipe the enemy units and have got some high OC. He's maybe a bit more on the niche side versus Abaddon in my opinion. Raptors don't really tend to get used as primary damage dealers quite so much, though I don't think he's overcosted to the point where he's unplayably bad. Otherwise, for a few staples, the battle line and the elites of Chaos are generally having a fairly good time of it right now. Legionaries are really quite a common include in a lot of lists. They can take a surprising amount of scary gear on small squads of them. Things like multiple heavy melee weapons, and including some big heavy weapons such as say a las cannon or a Reaper chain cannon. And then often the rest of the squad might want to take chain swords, and they get some nice rerolls against enemies on objective markers. They can be extra nice to jump out of a Rhino alongside a Chaos Lord, and then between their rerolls and the Chaos Lord's big damage output, they can absolutely murder things in close combat. Not bad for troops that also have good objective control. For the elites of Chaos, the Black Legion are particularly well known for their Bringers of Despair Terminator formation. I feel like at the moment they're pretty well fairly costed, 180 points per 5 of them, and he can take 10. They get particularly savage damage with re-rolling the hit rolls when they pass their Dark Pact test, though oddly enough that does have some kind of anti-synergy with Abaddon. And in general, most armies tend to take pretty maximal fists with them. You can only take a certain amount of power fists and chain fists per squad, but it's probably worth maxing those and maybe taking the paired accursed weapons along as well. Finally, for the elites in power armor, we've got the Chosen. Again, like the Legionaries, they can be very solid jumping out of Rhinos alongside Chaos Lords. They're 125 points per 5, so quite a bit more than the Legionaries, but you do get 3 wounds on the models, a whole bunch of fancy accursed power weapons in the squad, and their ability to charge in a turn when they advance is particularly helpful. It means they can have a massive threat range out of a Chaos Rhino without having to invest any stratagems or anything, and get to grips with the enemy nice and fast. Overall, at the moment, I feel like both Black Legion characters are playable, though not really stand out for their cost. Abaddon is certainly a massive centerpiece and will get stuff done, but also cost loads of points. And the Chaos Elite and Battle Line are all generally pretty strong, and most lists tend to include some Legionaries, and Chosen and Terminators are both good too. Moving on for the Black Legion's Veterans of the Long War formation, this is their themed detachment, and has a bunch of rules for continuing the Long War. Their core rule is Focus of Hatred, basically a Chaos Oath of Moment. You select a unit in your opponent's force in your command phase, and your entire army besides damned keyword models gets 2 reroll hits against that target. It's really quite a nice powerful damage dealer boost to go alongside Dark Pacts, so reroll hits and either lethal hits or sustained hits when you attack them is going to be absolutely brutal. Definitely hard to go too far wrong with that, and it'll make you extra good at taking out big tough stuff. Otherwise, for stratagems, there's an advance and shoot for infantry, and bolt guns, bolt pistols and combi weapons gain devastating wounds. It's not terrible, though not loads to be honest, maybe alright for mass combi bolter fire from a bunch of Terminators. There's Let the Galaxy Burn for 1 CP, which ignores cover when shooting, and torrent weapons get automatic 6 attacks. Ignores cover again being alright, maybe against a big tough target with a 2+ save and cover. Endless Ire plays into the Focus of Hatred. If you destroy your Focus of Hatred, you can nominate a new one within 12 inches of a Heretic Astartes character. 2 CP is really quite a lot, but 4 hit rerolls is quite a good buff as well. You could potentially destroy something in the shooting phase, then have a character ready to charge something else in the fight phase that can also get the 4 hit rerolls, and you could even chip in a bit of shooting beforehand as well. For 1 CP, there's Contemptuous Disregard. This one's basically Armor of Contempt but Chaos. You reduce enemy AP by 1 when they target this particular unit, though it is only just against one enemy unit now and not against everything this phase. It's still a really big deal in melee, and can be quite big against any single one big enemy shooting threat. Still pretty good for things with 2+ armor like Terminators or Vindicators. For 2 CP, we've got Bringers of Despair. Fights first against the enemy unit that's your Focus of Hatred. Another very expensive one there, but also pretty powerful with fights first. I guess it's nice enough if you've got a protracted combat going on and your opponent would otherwise be striking first, or if the big bad enemy unit that you're trying to focus down has managed to survive. Being able to know that wherever they charge something, you could hit them first could be a big deal. Finally, for 1 CP, there's Millennia of Experience. I say if anything, this one's the single biggest and most powerful one of them. Infantry or mounted non-damned units gets to reactive move 6 inches if enemies move within 9 inches of them in their move phase. And if playing on good terrain, a reactive 6-inch normal move, just being able to be triggered with that as the enemy advances on your positions can be absolutely game-changing in the right situation. Backpedal from a charge by 6 inches, so instead of charging your unit and killing it, the enemy falls short, or hide behind terrain so your unit can't just get shot down. Finally, they've got a bunch of enhancements as well. A critical hit on a 5+ against your Focus of Hatred, 4 back shoot and charge, a 4+ chance to gain a command point when your Focus of Hatred is destroyed, and once per turn rerolling hit wounds or saves for the bearer. I say all of those are handy enough, though maybe not crazy standout. The Eye of Abaddon, kill your Focus of Hatred one is alright. You will need a character to bear it though that's going to survive all game long. Overall, between all that, there's definitely some good value. I'd rate the core detachment rule and the reactive move stratagems to maybe be the 2 single biggest things, though some of the rest is definitely usable situationally. It has had some tournament success in the past, even if it isn't the current most fashionable one right now. As mentioned though, you don't have to stick to that one. Loads and loads of other options between the 7 others in the Codex and the Creations of Bile from the Grotmus Detachment download. The Creations one can support you if you want to do a sort of melee rush sort of feel. It certainly works well enough for Terminators, Chosen and Legionaries, and is also really nice for Possessed. Renegade Raiders, I feel like has a lot of similarities with just a practical chaos damage and defense type force. Fast movement and extra AP against taking points seems pretty much in line for the Black Legion. Pack-bound Zealots can really play into the marks of chaos, and again feels nice enough for a undivided legion with different blessings. Though there's all sorts of other ones that you could play if you want to, and you certainly could bounce between detachments if you wanted to try different things out. Rules overviews aside though, let's talk about getting some actual miniatures on the board. For first purchases, as mentioned, I'd be tempted to pick up Codex Chaos Space Marines, at least unless you're super experienced with what you're doing with Warhammer armies in general. And otherwise I'd either start with the Chaos Space Marine Legionaries kit or potentially Combat Patrol Chaos Space Marines. Nice to get some base troops if you just want to dip your toe into the faction, and otherwise not the worst to start with a discount deal just so you've got a core of forces and then you can get some games in and gradually expand with the things that you most find compelling, and maybe as a priority add a few heavy damage dealers so you're not completely at a loss when the enemy puts some tanks on the table. For the Chaos Space Marine Combat Patrol, this is the current kit: a Master of Possession Psyker leading a squad of Chaos Possessed, 10 Legionaries and 10 Cultists. It gets you around about 400 points on the board and is roughly a 27% discount versus buying these separately. As it goes, I think it's a pretty reasonable and helpful start to a Chaos Space Marine army. Legionaries and Cultists are both great on objectives really. The Cultists are dead cheap and can do screening and secondary things and have sticky objectives, and the Possessed are nice enough fast melee rush infantry with some devastating wounds once per game. Perhaps the only real downside rules-wise is the Master of Possession, who isn't really all that strong at the moment, though he does have an incredibly cool looking miniature to be fair, as I don't really think he's a loss to the box for that reason. As ever, when picking up Warhammer 40k miniatures, bear in mind the various different options on offer. Directly through Games Workshop's Warhammer web store is generally the most reliable but also the most expensive, and typically most people tend to pick things up through various discount retailers, either local gaming stores in their own area or online discounters. I've got a whole bunch of those linked down in the video description depending on where you are around the world. They save anywhere between 10 and 20% off Games Workshop's miniatures, 15% for Element Games in the UK, 21% for Gap Games in Australia, 10% for Fenris Workshop in Canada, 15% for Wargame Portal in the USA, and 16% for Taschengeldieb in Germany and the EU. There's plenty of other great options as well for discount retailers, though a big thank you to anyone using these ones when you do happen to order something in for Warhammer. It does go to help support the channel. Otherwise, beyond new shiny plastic though, certainly check out the second-hand market if you're on a budget. eBay can definitely get you some pretty great deals, particularly if you're willing to do a little bit of miniature restoration. Quality might be a bit variable, but it might be able to save you a fair bit of money, and potentially even time as well with assembly, or if people have already done adequate paint jobs. There's plenty of great options from 3D printing and third-party manufacturers as well. Plenty of people making their own sort of demon-style miniatures out there that could be good proxies for various Chaos units. Ravage style miniatures from Mini Wargaming can be another interesting one. They've got a few cool sculpts there. Overall, when starting the army, I'd probably start with the Combat Patrol box set or another discount deal if you can find one, and then go out from there adding units that appeal. In Codex Chaos Space Marines at the moment, I'd say that the vast majority of units out there are at least fairly usable, maybe a few notable ones that aren't so much. Games Workshop don't seem to like to balance flyers in this edition, and that's had bad news for the poor Helldrake. For a bunch of fairly reasonable expansion options though, Chaos Rhinos tend to be a staple in lots of effective Chaos lists at the moment, often with Lords leading Chosen or Legionaries and jumping out and messing up the enemy's army. As mentioned, Chosen are pretty iconic for the Black Legion and are pretty good elite melee damage dealers for that role. Generally it's worth having some big guns that can take down enemy tanks and heavies. Perhaps the Vindicator is particularly stand out for that, though other things like the Chaos Predator or some Obliterators could also do well. And Chaos Lords when souped up in close combat with their big go turn that they can do, and perhaps even more so if they're with some Chaos Legionaries for some rerolls, can really hit like a truck. One other way that you could look at things as well is trying to maximise some points per money in the early stages of collecting an army. If you get more points per dollar or pound spent, then you'll build up to an army size of any given point value that bit quicker. Perhaps a few good examples for that are things like the Warp Forged kit with the Obliterators and the Venom Crawler, which is almost like a bit of a slightly lesser broadcast Chaos discount deal. The Chaos Terminators have quite a lot of points for how much they cost, and Abaddon the Despoiler himself, with his big centerpiece character vibes and huge points cost, is actually a surprising way to get a lot of points into an army for cheapish. Otherwise, probably worth being aware of other past discount sets that you might see out there. The Chaos Space Marine launched in 10th edition had the Veterans of the Long War and Dread Talons kits. Unfortunately, these both sold out really quite quickly, and particularly that Veterans of the Long War one. They were both quite nice discount deals, though I feel like it's just kind of unlikely that you see these going for the kind of price that they were. Otherwise, you could look out for the previous Combat Patrol. Some of those miniatures will be turning up in the Hachette Partworks Combat Patrol magazine in the near future. That's going to be getting to the Chaos issues in the UK in the fairly near future as I'm recording this, and coming to various other places around the world like Spain, Germany and the USA not too long after. They have had some previous deals such as the Boarding Patrol and Balefleet Battle Force as well. Again though, just bear in mind that they actually have to be a good discount deal versus the miniatures now, as a lot of people selling them online and things will have increased the prices. Finally, for discount deal things, particularly with Chaos Space Marines, bear in mind all the stuff that you could pinch from the Age of Darkness. If you wanted a very different sort of Chaos Space Marine theme, you could go with the Heresy era armor marks of the big starter set. This one gets you a whole ton of Space Marines on the board, plus a Spartan that you could use as a Land Raider and a Contemptor that you could use as a Hellbrute. It's one of the better deals that Games Workshop sell in terms of plastic for the money, though it maybe does depend on whether or not you like the Corvus armor and the general aesthetic of it, and it's maybe a bit of a lesser trodden route. Even outside of this though, there can be some good deals on getting certain unit types. Like say for example, if you like the Cataphractii Terminators, you could get them and they come in big boxes that aren't really so much cheaper than 5 of 40k Terminator marks. In general in Warhammer 40k though, there's always a lot of scope for just collecting what you like the look of. 40k rules change over the time with balance updates, and at time of recording most units in the army are at least usable. Typically though, unless you really know what you're going for, or you want one specific theme where you really go to town on just one type of the army, I'd usually collect at least kind of balanced, have a good number of staples of things like the Legionaries, Cultists, and the Fighting Elites of various sorts, and maybe have a mix of them as opposed to just go hyper-focused on any one thing. That way you're likely to have an army that's still going to be pretty solid no matter how the rules change under you, and they'll be able to keep up the long war in a robust way for many years to come. I'd probably aim to not overspend in the initial purchases as well, maybe buy enough so you can play some small games of 40k, but then temper that with how fast you can actually build up and get paint on miniatures, as it certainly can be a bit of a long war in itself getting that on Chaos Space Marines, and you might not want the demotivation of an enormous sea of grey plastic models that you're wanting to get done over time. Finally, just for one example of what you could wind up with, here's one idea for a themed army list. Going with the Veterans of the Long War, roughly 2,000 points but not exact, more just for general idea and flavour, and putting some Chaos Space Marine Fighting Elite on the table. In pride of place we have Abaddon the Despoiler of course. He'll be running with a squad of 5 Terminators. He could potentially give some big hit rerolls to the Vindicator and Obliterators in the early turns, or maybe even just rapid ingress depending on what you think is going to be most useful in game. Then we've got 2 Chaos Lords with Demon Hammers. One's going with a big scary squad of 10 Chosen in a Rhino, and one's going with one of a set of squads of 2 Legionaries. There's 2 squads broken into halves, and they'll be both in the other Rhino. Between those 3 characters, that's 3 enormous damage punches in different parts of the enemy army. Beyond that, we've got 2 Chaos Cultists for their sticky objectives, nice cannon fodder or home objective campers early on, a squad of 5 Possessed to range up and be sort of a mid-tier threat, bullying sort of medium infantry units that the enemy might send towards objectives. 1 squad of Warp Talons that can also do the same. Ideally they might think about jumping on an enemy unit and ripping it to shreds and then bounding off the board, and then they can return via rapid ingress. There's a Venom Crawler on the board as well, maybe loosely themed because I was thinking about taking a Warp Forge box plus a Combat Patrol box to make this army. And alongside them, there's some Obliterators for some heavy hitting fire support and a Vindicator to help destroy enemy heavies. You could definitely go a bit heavier on the big Chaos tanks if you wanted to though, particularly with Abaddon's rerolls in the mix. In any case, hopefully that should give some pretty scary firepower and some enormously powerful charges with your big melee threats, marking 1 unit for the big rerolls each turn and maybe making some pretty annoying reactive moves with the big infantry units. Ideally hoping it to be in a place where they can perhaps wipe out something major in the enemy army and then be in a position where a reactive normal move could get them to safety if that's achievable. In any case, I'll leave this one here though. Let me know your thoughts as to collecting the First Amongst Traitors and Abaddon's Legion in 40k. Look forward to hearing your thoughts from experienced Black Legion generals down in the comments. As mentioned, if you want to check out some other Chaos Space Marine things to watch, I'll leave a unit review video that I did down in the video description, and hopefully a bit more to come with that front in the near future, so feel free to subscribe if you want to see the full strengths and weaknesses of each Chaos unit video. Otherwise, if you'd like to support the channel, feel free to check out those affiliate discount links in the video description if you're picking up any Warhammer models in the near future. And the channel does have a Patreon page as well if you found any of these videos useful, if you would like to support and keep them coming. In any case though, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.